If you're local, please come join us anytime. We do have some of our brochures that'll be available at the back as you go out. We have one event left this year, unusually on May the 2nd. The evening after graduation, we're going to have an event which is a first for us because it's going to combine not just a speaker, but also some music. This is modeled loosely after a program called No Small Endeavor in Nashville that some of you may be familiar with. So we have a speaker who is Jessica Hooten-Wilson. She's our commencement speaker, a scholar of literature and who writes widely. But she'll be joined at First Presbyterian Church by me, by Eugene Wolfe, whom some of you know from the Barter Theater, who's a musician and a wonderful human being, Sherlonda Fitzgerald on cello. So it's going to be mixed things going on throughout the evening. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I hope it's going to be a success, and it'll be a bigger success if some of you will come out and join us. So May the 2nd will be our final event of the year. We've added a number of things this year. The King Institute is trying to expand some of the opportunities community-wise beyond just having a speaker series. This year we had, in honor of Jane Austen's 250th birthday, a Jane Austen book club that met at the brand new Dogwood bookstore downtown on State Street. And if you haven't gone there, you should. It's a marvelous place. And they hosted us for that. Dr. Karen Shaw in English led us looking through each of Jane Austen's novels, one per month, in the order of their publication. We also have had a conversation group based on some of the themes that come up during the speaker series, and we finished our season yesterday with that, led by Father Joe Dunnigan. So we're trying to do more and more in terms of outreach into the community to try to offer to the community some of the work that we do here at King in terms of integrating faith and learning, in terms of thinking Christianly, and in terms of formation of character and vocation in our students. And this is part of that. And so we're glad you're here to take part in that and hope that we can entice you out to other events as well. To add something for Dogwood, I thought, what better resource is there than King's own faculty? And to find the ones who are not about to have finals week coming up, I found the ones who have stepped down, except in one case here. So in case you don't know them for some strange reason, Pat Flannagan on my left taught music here for many years. What are your years? 38 years. Randall Gilmore, professor of education for 8 years. And also both King graduates. Simeon Pickard taught chemistry from 32 years. And Tese Stephens, who has been adjunct, professor of nursing, and dean of nursing, all here at King, and she now serves as the academic dean at the Medical University of South Carolina. So it's a distinguished group that I'm among, and all I've got to do is throw a couple of softballs out, and I'm going to let them run with it. And we're glad to have them here. President Tooley has emphasized a couple of things in the way that he's trying to set vision here at King, and one of those is the formation in our students of a Christian mind, that we've emphasized not just in the classroom but beyond the classroom, the ways in which the doctrines and the habits of the Christian life shape the way we think. And that's part of the vision he has, and the other vision is how we become a Christian university in a full sense, how that faith commitment affects us from the business office to the sports fields, to the classrooms, to the theater. And so this is a vision that he's been encouraging us along, but one that we've already had, in a sense. It's a vision that he is catching up and trying to kind of reignite for us. And these four individuals, I think, are exemplary for their work in both respects. So I want to throw out, first of all, to these four, a little bit about how you look at your work at King now. And can you maybe you can give us an individual account of somebody, a particular student, or maybe just a general reflection on how you saw this formation happening in students at King during your time here. You can go in whatever order you want to go.
Okay, I'll go first. When I look at my time here at King and how, what my career was about here, I look at the alumni who came through my program. And whether they were a major or not, and the music major hadn't been here forever, whether they were major or just maybe in the choir, I look at the alumni, what they've done, how they've lived their lives, what their success stories have become, because it's kind of like a genealogical chart or a pedigree. And academicians always say that I study with so-and-so who study with so-and-so. Well, I have people that I'm proud to say were my students who've gone on now to be teachers, or they've gone on now to be very successful church musicians, or they've gone on to careers in opera. So I can see lots of things happening, but I guess that's the answer first to your question.
So I was shaped by several professors here. The most influential, Dr. John Gaines and Dr. Tom Peake. So when I became a teacher, I already had good role models. When I came back to King after 30 years in public education, it was almost like I could hear the way they had taught me, and so that's the way I tried to teach my kids. I maintained relationships with both Tom Peake and John Gaines until the end of their lives, and I still have great relations with a lot of the kids that I taught here at King. So I think for me, those relationships that I formed here with my professors allowed me the freedom to do the same thing with my students, and that continues today and till the day I die.
Is it on? Okay. Well, I'm kind of the unicorn up here in that the majority of my almost 40 years in my career has been outside of a faith-based organization. But the time that I have spent here, and I was actually a student here my freshman year of college as a chemistry major, and ended up changing to nursing and moving. We didn't have nursing here then. But one of the things that has struck me the most and has impressed the most on me during my time here at King has been the foundation that's built that is so critical when we get out into the world and working. My research is in resilience, specifically with physicians and nurses, and so I see a lot of the importance of the right mindset and motive, especially when it makes the most difference, when you're called to act or called to make decisions and it's in a difficult situation. And I think the atmosphere here, the faith foundations and the conversations that happen around that, to ask questions and to really work through some of these issues, helps to prepare. Instead of just telling people what to believe, you're guiding them through that and they're understanding what they believe and why they believe it. And that's what really matters when it comes down to it in those difficult situations.
When I started here in '92, I was captured by the motto, I guess, maybe that's what you'd call it, for the church and learning. And I guess that's still some sort of motto. And I understood it, I came to understand it in broad terms, the church meaning God's kingdom as a whole, and learning meaning something beyond just, classroom learning skills and learning about, students learning about themselves. And so a sizable part of my job was guiding entering students into self-discovery. What has God really made them to be? What has God created them to do? And very often it wasn't what they came in picturing themselves, being, the CSI agent or the pediatric oncologist that's going to cure cancer. Although there's nothing wrong with those things, but those are romantic notions very often instead of realities. And so just helping students find who they were. And a couple of stories, I'll just tell one of them because I don't want to dominate too much here, but I had a student, and I can share his name. I've told him that I share this story, and he was okay with it. Bill Heath was a baseball player back about 20, 25 years ago, and he came in interested in science and interested in baseball, but he was much more focused on baseball than he was science. And so he eked through general chemistry, and in the spring semester, he was just barely making it. And back in those days, we had a rule that if a student could miss more than 25% of the classes, they could fail just on attendance. It wasn't utilized very often, but anyhow, that was the rule. And it was approaching, he was approaching that mark, that 25%. And I said, and I just quit taking attendance because I didn't want it to become an issue. He passed the course. That's it. He just passed the course. And I thought, well, okay, he's interested in baseball. I'll never see him again. Next semester, Organic 1, taking roll. I come down the roll and I said, William Heath. Bill Heath? And I look at him, he grinned sheepishly, and I just shook my head and went on calling roll. He remembered that. He made a B in Organic 1, and he made an A in Organic 2, and he went on to major in chemistry and biology, got a master's in pharmacology, and ultimately a PhD in medicinal chemistry, which was a subfield of organic, and he's still working for a pharmaceutical company today. So anyhow, kind of a funny story there.
Baseball didn't work out for him, though.
I told people, I said, sometime that summer he decided baseball was not looking very promising for him. He told me later, he said, I can't really remember what caused the change, so I can't verify that or deny it, either one, but anyhow.
It's funny to me how in each of those we touch on things that are generational, and I think small colleges tend to have this strength that you get handed something personally from people down the line. And the institution is the cradle for that, but it's this personal relationships, both with your own faculty and with your students, that stand out. And I wonder if you could comment for us a little bit on maybe the upper end of that. Who is it here, whether it's your professor or whether it's somebody you worked with, who kind of mentored you, guided you toward the way that King works, helped you helped enrich your work here? Can you think of a story or tell us about a person who was important for you in that way?
Yeah, when I was a student at King, there was no music department. There were no music classes. There was choir, and there were private lessons in piano, organ, and voice. And I came in as a freshman, sang in the choir. At the end of my freshman year, the choir director then, his name was C.C. Loomis, he was, 6'3" and about 400 pounds, one of the biggest people I'd ever seen. Smoked several packs a day, so he was always huffing and puffing. And he came to me at the end of my freshman year and he said, Sonny, he called me Sonny all 4 years. He said, Sonny, next year you're going to be my student conductor. Totally blindsided by that, but that sentence changed my life. Totally changed my life. Because I got in front of a choir the next year as a student, never having any theory, never really having any musical experience. I was a drum major in high school, that didn't count. And I realized, gosh, when I do this, those people react. They change. And I can make good things happen. I can screw it up really quickly, too. But, that one sentence changed my life. And then I encountered a colleague who became probably my best friend on the faculty. Her name was Penny Mattice. Some of you will recognize that name. She was one of the most remarkable people I ever knew. And she said, to be a good teacher, it takes two things. Number one, know your subject. We can all learn to do that. Number two, learn how to communicate to those people. Not to yourself, not to your parents. Learn how to communicate to those people of a different generation. You figure out how to do that, you'll be a good teacher.
So I came to King because of Thelma Gaines. She was my high school French and Latin teacher, and her husband, John Gaines, founded the School of Education here. And I started King when they had J-term. And Dr. Gaines enrolled me in Tom Peake's 3,000 level history class as a freshman, Culture and Religion in Communist Countries. And our first class was over in Bristol. And I just remember I got there early, I'm new, and Dr. Peake was writing on the board, and it was a quote from the Communist Manifesto, "A specter is haunting Europe," 1848, Karl Marx, Frederick Engels. And I had heard of communism, but I didn't know anything else about it. And after the class, I remember going to the library for like 5 hours, just reading everything I could get. Later on, in 82 or 3, my parents both lost their jobs at the same time, and my mother said I couldn't keep going to King, that they couldn't afford King. And when I told Dr. Peake, he didn't take me to financial aid, he took me to President Mitchell's office. And he said, "I can't afford to lose this man." And I'm pretty sure no one had ever called me a man before. And then he said, "He's the best one in my program." And I certainly didn't know that. And Dr. Mitchell came up with the number. I called my mom, and she said I could stay at King. And later that semester, Dr. Peake asked me to be a tutor for Western Civ kids at $8 an hour. And the minimum wage was $3.35. And there are many other examples I could give. When I started teaching public school, he came to my class and lectured. When my son was born, he gave me a copy of his book, Keeping the Dream Alive, the first comprehensive history of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And when I returned to King, I was able to take he and his wife, Ann, out to breakfast and reminded him of all the things that he had done for me while I was here. And it was much the same with Dr. Gaines. So while I was here learning academically, I was also learning far more about the importance of listening to people and investing in people and taking a risk. And I think both Dr. Gaines and Dr. Peake took a great chance on me because I was a first-generation college graduate. My father only had a 9th grade education. And those men, they didn't really treat me like a student. They treated me like a son. So that is, when I returned to King, that's what I tried to do. I tried to really listen to my students, really invest in them, and try to get them to see their potential like those guys had done for me.
I'm embarrassed to say I can't remember the person's name, but some of you all may remember it. I came in 1982 as a chemistry major on a full scholarship. And since I was a little girl, I grew up that I was going to be a pediatrician, and never really knew where that came from. That was just going to be who I was and what I was going to do. It got to King and started the second semester. He was over the chemistry department then.
Madison.
Yes. Okay, his picture's in Whitehall, right? Yes. What is his last name?
Madison.
Madison, yes, okay. He called me into his office, and I thought, oh my goodness, I was terrified. And he said, I just want to talk to you for a minute. He said, it doesn't seem like your heart's in this. And I said, and I was doing okay. I wasn't all A's, but I wasn't Heath either at that point. But he probably saw that I was not really putting myself into it, especially not given what was expected of me with the scholarship and everything. And he said, why do you want to do this? And no one had ever asked me that before. It had just been assumed, and that was what I was going to do. And I said, I don't know that I do want to do this. And he said, I don't think you do. And he said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to be a nurse. And he said, then why are you here? And I said, well, I've got this scholarship. This is what, he said, that's not a reason to do this. And I said, I can't tell my dad that. My dad will not ever accept that. And he said, let's call him. And he called my dad, and my dad came up and scheduled a meeting and it was the three of us. And I'll never forget it in his office. And he just with such compassion, but also giving me a voice in that conversation. And he said, she doesn't need to be here right now. And he said, we don't have a nursing program. And he said, this is not what she needs to be doing. And my dad listened and, walked out. And that was a huge turning point for me. I finished out that semester and then transferred into a nursing program which was exactly what God wanted me to be doing. But I never forgot that compassion and speaking the truth, even when it wasn't what someone wanted to hear at that moment, and the hard truths. And I'll never forget his name now, since you reminded me of that. But I think of him a lot of times, and that has had a profound impact on me and how I mentor others. And speaking the truth, I call it compassionate courage, saying the things that may not be easy to say, but are sometimes the most compassionate thing that you can do is to tell the truth to someone in those situations. So that had a huge impact on me.
Lou Madison was my boss when I first got here. He was department chair for 5 years when I got here in '92. And I learned quite a bit from Lou. He was very straightforward, almost blunt, but forthright, and he didn't mind, telling students, you need to do this, or don't need to do this. It's like, and he had a lot of experience, and he leaned on that. And I learned quite a bit from him. I remember several things, but one thing I remember, just curious and things you remember, but was one of his sayings was, the more you test, the more they study. The more you test, the more they study. And I took that to heart. And I saw the logic and the wisdom in that. And that has been was a guide for me through my teaching career.
Great. I came in 2004, and I was applying for a job in European history, which had been vacated by Tom Peake. And so thankfully, it only said that you had to be able to teach European history, because the other things that Tom did, I didn't do. I couldn't teach ballroom dancing. I didn't teach myself Russian like he did. I didn't get to know Coretta Scott King and do a history of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. I hadn't been struck by lightning, I think 3 times. 7. 7 times. That may explain so much about Tom. And nor do I do the Elvis impersonation, all of which were marks of Tom Peake. But he couldn't have been more gracious to me. He came to my interview and said nice things to me then. And then I also got to know Bill Wade. And Bill was a tremendous encouragement. Before I even came to King, I got a letter from Bill because an old family friend of ours was Neil Caldwell, who was Bill's brother-in-law. And so Bill and I got the marvelous opportunity to do the eulogy at Bill's funeral because he had outlived everybody else. And so that was a real honor for me to do that. Those men were important for me, but I didn't work with them. But the person who I had already taught for 5 years when I came to King, but the person who became my mentor and still is Craig McDonald, known to some of you. And Craig's generosity to me was just incredible. And I think when we think about what is the nature of Christian University, we don't limit it to the classroom, because what Craig did for me was not only to help me as a young teacher figure out what was important and figure out what needed to be the focus of what I did in the classroom, and also push me academically. We were in a similar academic field, actually. He did late medieval and early modern Scottish poetry, and I did late medieval and early modern Scottish history. And so we had a lot of overlap. And I should mention that he has just gotten a publication that has been in the work for 30 years now. It's a volume with the Scottish Text Society. of a volume of a thing called The Mirror of Wisdom. In any case, Craig, that was all gracious and helpful to me. He also came over and helped me with plumbing and wiring issues at my house. He hung the curtains in my office. He did all these mundane things to help out. I learned stuff from him that I had never learned before about the care and keeping of these basic things in addition to the work of the classroom. And I thought he just embodied for me what a place like King can do for its students, that it's not limited to the intellectual endeavor. It certainly starts there, but it's a much more whole process. I want to skip ahead and ask you for a story, if you wouldn't mind, of one of your students. Tell us about somebody who you think really took what King had to offer and was transformed by that and took it somewhere else. I'll start to give you a minute to think. Because one of our former students is a classic example of what Simeon was talking about with that ability to pivot. Once you come to the small college and you discover that you're not going to do the thing that you thought you were going to do, this student of mine arrived at King and was convinced she was going to be a vet. And she spent 3 years studying to be a vet, but she ran into this little buzzsaw, which was organic chemistry. And organic was a challenge, and it kept being a challenge. And so as a senior, rising senior, she came to my office and she said, I've decided I'm not called to be a vet. And she said, instead, I'm going to go do a PhD in history. And I said, well, that's nice. We made it. She had some credits. We worked it out so she could graduate. And I thought, well, this is fine. She'll graduate, good student, and then we'll figure out what's next. Sure enough, 2 years later, she was enrolled for a PhD in the history of aerospace history at Auburn University. She has since switched. She's now involved in a PhD at North Dakota. That has to do with space. I don't know what it is. But she was a great example for me of the way that the King had served her well. It had served her well by showing her what she shouldn't do, and it served her well by opening another door. And she's just, for me, one of the great examples we have of how the education here can work at its best. And it works in terms of calling. We have a great we've had a series of Lilly Foundation grants to help students explore vocational discernment. And she's kind of my poster child for that process.
Okay, two students came to mind, so I'm going to tell quick stories about them both. One was a young woman who came here to major in math and French. And she walked in my office one day. She was a sophomore. Said, I think I want to major in music. And I said, don't do it. I said, and if you can do anything else and be happy, don't do it. Because making a career in music, it's tough. And I said, talk to your parents, come back and see me. She came back and sat down in my office and she cried, big time, sobbed, cried. She said, I have to do music. And I said, okay, I'm right there with you. And she said, I think I'm going to double major in French. Great, I'm right there with you. Think it's a good thing. Long story short, she went on to graduate school, earned a master's in opera and vocal performance, became an opera singer in the New York metropolitan area for a while, then started her own opera company where she was producing and directing small operas, and then her career was derailed when she fell in love. And she got married, they have a small son, and now she teaches privately. She teaches children in Manhattan. She teaches music. She lives in a 900 square foot apartment. She has 48, at last count, ukuleles stuffed around her apartment because there's no room for them, but she teaches kids. Second one is a young man who left here, went to graduate school in music. He came here, that's what I'm going to do. Went to graduate school in music, and then he started writing the faculty here, praising us for what we taught him. Nobody had ever done that to me. Nobody had ever done that. Again, long story short, he moved back to Bristol 2 years ago and took over the music program at a non-denominational non-denominational, very large church, building a music program. Before he came, they were using canned music. Now he's hiring orchestras. He's got a choir of 45, 50, many of whom are King alums who were in choir when he was in choir here. Two real success stories.
So my student is Rachel Airwood, Rachel McSherry now. I was just coming out of being a principal, and Common Core had been unleashed by the State Department, and I'd been to several trainings in Nashville about it, and I asked a question in my assessment and evaluation class about it, and she was so fluent in her knowledge of it, and it was just one of those beautiful answers, and I loved her at once. And the more I got to know her, the more I loved her. She was a double major in English and education, wanted to be a secondary education teacher, and she wanted to do her, actually in Spanish as well, so she wanted to do her immersion experience in Pamplona, Spain, because Professor Macion had gone to this school, and I was having to work things out with the State Department to get it approved. So my wife and I actually flew to Pamplona with Rachel to help get her settled. And there was a conversation, Professor Macion's sister and brother-in-law were taking us into France, and I was up front with Joaquin, and we were having a great conversation, and I could hear Rachel and my wife talking, and I thought, my wife loves her now just as much as I do. And we have remained, she graduated in 2016, so she, in the course of that time, got married. She works in Hamlin County in Morristown. She just had a baby back in January, and about once a year or so, she will call me with some issue that she's facing, and we will talk for an hour or an hour and a half. And Beth and I had two sons. Rachel is the daughter I never had, and she did the student lecture her senior year, and it remains to this day one of the best. You guys heard it. I mean, one of the best student lectures I've ever heard, but she's just such a great example of what faith and learning really means, and I'm just thankful that we've maintained our friendship over the years.
And that's available on YouTube. If you go to YouTube and you look up King Institute and you look up Rachel Arrowwood, it's a phenomenal talk. So.
My example is Christina Ketron. Some of you all may know her. She is from Kingsport originally. I think I learn more from my students than they do from me sometimes. I always learn from them, but I had her as a graduate student. She came through the nurse educator program here in the master's program, and she came in very, I guess sad was probably the best word to use for that. She had not been accepted in the nurse practitioner program, which was her first choice. She wanted to be a family nurse practitioner, but she got a second spot in the nurse educator cohort. This was quite a few years ago, and I admired her immediately because she didn't just say no to that, but that she accepted that this was probably what God wanted for her to do, but it was still very tough because that was not what she had planned on being. And she thrived in the program. She did very well and went on to become an amazing professor. And then a few years later, her dad developed Parkinson's disease. And it really became a focus of her time and attention. And around the same time, the Medical University of South Carolina, where I was and where I still am, developed an adult gerontology nurse practitioner program. And that wasn't available when she was first going through. And so she ended up going into that, and often would talk about God's providence in not answering that prayer at that time and putting her in the right place. And she went on to get her Doctor of Nursing practice in adult gerontology and specialized in Parkinson's disease. Her dad had passed away by then, but now she is leading the national efforts in Parkinson's research through the VA, and doing tremendous work there. And, I learned from her that we don't always know. We just have to be faithful and keep on and persevering and doing what God is leading us to do. But I always think about her when I have a student who's disappointed or things don't seem to go the way they had wanted or the way they had hoped or expected. And I think that's one of the beauties about King, is that we can talk about those things, or you can actually talk about God and faith and trusting in His wisdom and sovereignty through those experiences. But I have many more stories of students I could tell that are a lot funnier than that. One, I had to ask a student to leave my office so I could pray before I responded to him. But that's a story for another day.
I remember, well, of course, a lot of students, but I'll just talk about one. Elizabeth Shipley was her name, and she is now Bennett. She came, it wasn't really clear what she was interested in, but pretty quickly she gravitated toward chemistry and thought about education. And I said, well, Elizabeth, you need to jump into the education courses really quick here, because there's just a lot to be done there. And she did, and she did well at it. She was a cheerleader the whole time and ended up being captain of the cheerleading squad. But she graduated in chemistry education, went on to teach. She's been teaching high school at Science Hill, high school chemistry. Just recently, she let me know that she finished her EDD. She's starting to explore the possibility of moving into administration. I secretly hope she doesn't, because good high school chemistry teachers are hard to find. But anyhow, I certainly am very proud of her.
I want to know if we have any other stories. I want to hear a little bit more about the one that you had to pray about before you answered him. And I want to know if you have a moment like that you want to share with this audience of alumni. Tell us a little bit more.
Okay, well, this was, I had just completed my PhD and had come back here. I had been teaching as adjunct, and so this was a student that I had in the undergraduate pre-licensure program. And he was one of those students that just tried really tested your patience every day. And I was teaching research and theory, and he would sit on the front row and cry every class. And not just quiet cry, he would wail, "I can't do this, Dr. Stephens. I don't know how to do this. And this makes no sense to me." And then he would leave class to go smoke like every 15 minutes. And so then he would come to my office after every class, and he'd say, "I don't know why I'm not passing the tests." And I said, "Well, let's talk about that." So this went on, every class. This would happen every class. He would wail, cry, go smoke, come back, cry a little bit more, fail the quiz, come back, and then he would come to my office and do it again. So nothing I had done to help him was working. And he didn't want to really listen to anything that I was telling him that he needed to do or offered to help. So I was at my wit's end, and he came in one day and sat down in the chair, as he always did, and asked for a snack. And I gave him a snack, and then he started, and I said, "Okay, you need to step out for just a minute." And he said, "Why, Dr. Stephens?" And I said, "I just have to pray before I respond to you. I don't know what I'm going to say, and what is going to come out probably isn't what should come out. So I just need you to step out." And he just looked at me, and he stepped out, and I did pray, and I said, "God, please help me say the right thing, because what I want to say I know is not going to do any good." And then I went and got him and came back in and went on. He did successfully graduate. We kept in touch. I haven't talked to him in a couple of years, but he ended up passing his licensure exam on the first try. And he followed my path. I was an ED trauma nurse the first 20 years before I got into research and leadership. Became a trauma nurse in New York City and just thrived there, went on to become a nurse practitioner and is doing very well. But that's kind of one of the Heath stories. You just, wow, I never imagined. But yeah, he tested me a lot.
This is a harder one. Not too long before I retired. In fact, it was soon after the Virginia Tech shooting, whenever that happened. And tensions among faculty were elevated a little bit. We had discussions with the security people here on campus and what to do and how, all this kind of stuff. It was that summer, in the summer, I was working my office downstairs, and this young man who had been in my class came walking in, and I could tell that he was very angry. And maybe because of what we had talked about, I was on alert. And he even came in with his fist clenched. And I thought, uh-oh, how's this going to turn out? And he said, you failed me in your class. And I said, I did not fail you. You failed yourself. You didn't attend class. You didn't do the work. The same thing that we've all experienced. He was a baseball player. Well, I was a baseball player, and I couldn't come to class. And I said, we had worked things out. If you needed help, come see me. He never did. So he said, that's the whole reason I came to King. And then I had him. Said, you came all the way from Florida to come to King to be a baseball player? Do you have aspirations that you're going to make it in the major leagues and have a career? He was stunned. He said, well, no. Well, don't you think that your classes might lead you to a job and some other things? And it began to calm down. But when he first walked in the room, I confess, I could see bad things happening for just a moment. But when he left, he said, I don't know if I can come back. I'm going to lose my scholarship. And so I directed him to financial aid and said, make sure they understand. And anyway, he did come back for his final year. I think he was unable to play baseball for the fall semester, which is scrimmage anyway, but he did play his final semester at King. But yeah, I have a vivid memory of that incident.
So this is a basketball player, and I had a lot of great athletes go through the School of Ed, so I'm not chastising all student athletes. But he wasn't coming to class, and I talked to him, I prayed for him, and finally, I guess it was midterm, and he got an F. And Coach Pitts comes to my office with this young man, and he was a non-traditional, he'd worked in a factory or something, and so he was in his early 20s. He wasn't straight out of high school. And Coach Pitt said, I want to know why you have an F in here. And so I explained, well, he doesn't come to class. We only meet once a week, and he's already missed 3, and according to the syllabus, he could fail, but I'm trying to give him another chance. And so he said, I just can't get up. It's an 8 o'clock class. And I kind of laughed, and I said, so what's it going to take? His name is Timmy. I said, what's it going to take, Timmy? Am I going to have to call you every Thursday morning? And he said, would you? And I did. So every Thursday morning about 7:30, I would say, and I would dial his number, and hello. And I would say, hey, this is Coach Gilmore, or Professor Gilmore then. I said, I'm really looking forward to seeing what you can bring to class today, and I'll see you about 5 minutes till 8. Because I didn't want to give him 8 o'clock because I didn't think that would work. And he didn't miss any more classes. My prayers were answered. He did not complete his degree, though. I'm sorry to say. Well, I'm probably glad to say.
Well, just sharing stories here. I remember one girl who came here, wanted to be a horse doctor. She wanted to go to vet school and be a horse doctor. Well, I didn't, if you know the situation, even if she went to vet school, the chances of becoming a horse doctor are about 1 out of 100. And veterinary medicine was not her skill set in the first place. So she was in chemistry, and it was not going well, and she would show up in my office multiple times, and after about the third or fourth time, she was not getting it, and she said, exasperated, she said, I don't know what chemistry has to do with sticking your arm up a horse's rear end anyhow. And I didn't even know how to respond to that. It's all I could do to keep from bursting out laughing. But she eventually recognized that this was not where she belonged. I remember seeing her about several years later. She came back for graduation, or I think it was not her, she graduated, but for somebody else's graduation. I asked her how she was doing and what she was doing. She smiled kind of sheepishly. She said, yeah, I got a master's in clinical counseling, and I'm working as a clinical psychologist. And I said, well, great, good. You found where you belong. I'm so glad to hear that.
And I would flip that a little bit, because I think all of us would have a similar experience, how much the students have meant to me through the years. And for me, the thing that has been the measure throughout 22 years now at King has been my kids. I have 2 children who are both on the autism spectrum, and they both grew up here at King. And generations of my students have gotten to know them and have been sweet to them and kind to them and welcoming. And so for them, that's become kind of a constant. And I have been consistently impressed with the way that our students have been able to adapt and engage with kids who are very different from them. Tese knows my daughter well, so she understands well what that phenomenon's like. But that's been a great encouragement to me along the way as well, is the way that the students have been a support to me as well, and of course the other faculty members and staff. As we're starting to run a little low on time, I do want to ask, you've got a little perspective now. You haven't been in the classroom here for a minute. As you think about your time at King, what is it that you think is the essence of the thing? Because you taught over many, many years, 32 years. And looking back at your time as a student and across those years, what is it that you would define as the essence of King University? What is it, the thing that you have seen as a constant through those years? And how do you see that going forward as part of our vision as an institution?
I think for me, the essence of King is community. I was, when I was a student at King, there were 300 students total. I knew everyone's name. I could almost tell you their hometown. I often could tell you what their parents did. I could often tell you if they had siblings. It was an amazing, amazing community. That has borne fruit in my particular class of 1974. I was another 74 classmate here. We have remained incredibly close, taking vacations together. Alumni weekend, Dogwood weekend, has always been important to my classmates, and they often come back for this. And I know part of that is because I've lived here all these years, and we were a free place to stay, a free place to eat, but they would come and stay with us, and that community has continued. I see that also in the alums, in at least choir alums. We took choir tours every year, and everybody dreaded it, including me, until it was over, and we realized the bonding and the community that occurred for riding a bus for 5 or 6 hours together, and then getting off and trying to clean up and put on a smile for these people you'd never seen before and will never see again, and sing for them. And it was a group of people from various places who came together with one goal in mind, to represent King and to sing. And I think that's continued. The stories I hear from them, I think that's continued throughout.
So for me, toward the end of Dr. Gaines's life, he was in a facility, and I would go see him quite often. And I know at one point he said something like, "Look at me, look at what I've become." And he had written a state textbook for California when he was there. He founded the School of Education. He was a 2-term mayor of Bristol. And I said, "Dr. Gaines, I don't think you understand what you taught me and what you're still teaching me." And I had a notepad with me, and I read from the notepad. I said, "Tonight you said," and whatever it was he said, I read it back to him, and I said, "I have a class at 7 o'clock." And I said, "I'm beginning my class with your quote. So what you taught me and what you continue to teach me, it doesn't stop here. It doesn't end here. And what I tell my students tonight that you just taught me, it's going to resonate with 1 or 2 of those kids. And they're going to tell that story. And so your impact is exponential. That is what you've become. That is who you are. That is what you are. That is what you did, and that is what you're still doing." And I was reminded a little bit later on when he got weaker, and I was helping him eat, I was helping him drink, and some other things, and I just remembered, I don't think I've ever admired. He was so smart. I don't think I've ever been around anyone, except maybe Tom Peake, as intelligent as this guy, and yet he served me, and now I'm serving him. So it was very sad to me and very humbling, but at the same time, there was something beautiful about the fact that I came here as a 18 or 19-year-old not knowing anything, and I was helping usher him to heaven. So for me, that's what I'll always think about King. It shaped my life, and it continues to do so.
I'll echo community. For me, I think it's primarily around identity formation. And Socrates, I'll paraphrase a quote from Socrates, that the first part is greater than the sum of the whole. And that just means your entrance into something, or your initial introduction to something, has a greater impact on you. And in medicine, we call it purposeful imprinting, where we're very intentional about the first experiences that role models and mentors and those individuals need to demonstrate the characteristics that we want to see in practice. And so when you come to college and you're leaving home for the first time, those first introductions of becoming an adult is really establishing an identity apart from everything else. And I think that's what I experienced in the story I told you at the beginning of when I first actually asked, why am I here? I'd never even thought about that. I had always done just what I was told I was going to do. And I think that's true for a lot of people, to never really know who you are and why you believe what you believe, and then to be able to act on that. And so I think you do that through a sense of community and these other things as well, but I would say that it's providing a safe place where you can form an identity as an adult and in a discipline that, and you do it in a way that's going to establish a foundation that will serve you the rest of your life.
Community is a good word. I think another word would be relationships. And we've shared a lot of stories about relationships we've had with students. And I think that's something that is distinctive about King compared to some other schools that I have been a part of, that I graduated from. It wasn't King. It was a state university. You know, we just didn't have relationships with faculty there. But here at King, the students did have relationships with faculty, and many times very impactful relationships, as people have talked about. I think that's significant and a significant part of the King experience.
And I would add the word service. It's implied in Latin in that motto that Simeon mentioned earlier, Ecclesiae et Literis, There's an implied for in those Latin endings. And I think that has been exemplary for me throughout 22 years here, is the ability to see people serving others, whether it's faculty or staff. And you think about people like Leona, who've been doing this for so long, putting themselves at the service of those who are here to study. And I think that has been a tremendous theme for me throughout my time at King, whether it was Craig McDonald putting a disposal under my sink for me, or whether it was the way that other people have boosted each other throughout my time at King. I think we really do have a strong sense of service. I've heard stories of RTL Liston in pursuit of students going all around Southwest Virginia, Northeast Tennessee, and finding ways to get these kids here, including Catherine Patterson, of course, who tells great RTL Liston stories. So I do think that's embedded in the DNA here, and I hope it will continue to be embedded in the DNA. And I think it exemplifies a phrase that President Tooley is using, and I think one that we ought to embrace fully as an institution, which is the phrase Christ-animated. Christ-animated campus. The example of Jesus is the one that brings us to life, that binds us together as a community, that gives us that sense of relationship and mutual service. We just had Holy Week. We just remember this moment where Jesus washes the feet of his disciples. And I think that is embedded in King's DNA as well. And it's a place that it's been a privilege to be at, and a privilege to be with these good people today and to be with you. Thank you for being with us this afternoon. There's a lot more dogwood. If you have any questions, you can find Logan, and he'll be happy to tell you about it. Don't forget, May the 2nd, come and hear our program at First Presbyterian Church with Jessica Hooten-Wilson, Eugene Wolfe, and Sherlonda Fitzgerald. And please join me in thanking these 4 fine panelists. Autographs are available for any of the 4.